Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Addict 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Build Training Time Harem with Anko and More Girls Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Oh, so this is what you do when the poor Gaki's not looking. The young woman spoke up from the roof of a nearby roof, looking down at the group of people with weapons of all sorts. She didn't know at first why they were grouped up when that had chased a boy that had passed her not 5 minutes ago. When she had caught up to the group in question, she only had to look at the boy for a split second before figuring out why they were after him. His body now was covered in his own blood and various bruises were scattered all over his body as he lay down half-conscious in the center of a group of men and women, all angry at him for the beast inside of him. The group had taken a small step away from the boy as they had heard an unmistakable voice, one that filled with determination to protect the boy, as well as venom for the villagers who were attacking them this night. It wasn't an uncommon thing for the blonde-haired boy to be chased and beaten, but today was by far the worst of them. It wasn't just clenched fists and kicks, but weapons as well, mainly kunai and shuriken. Many people's grips on their weapons had tightened with fear as they looked up, seeing a large trench coat flapping in the wind gently. Her purple, spiky, pineapple-like hair was sitting atop her head as it usually did. The group's eyes widened in fear as they fully recognized who was calling them out, and although they were afraid, some of them weren't going to show it. "We don't have business with you, snake whore," he spat out, rewarded with a piercing glare from the woman on the roof. "We just want the demon brat." She knew what it felt like to have the whole village against you, to have them hate you and treat you lower than dirt just because of association. It wasn't exactly the same case with the boy who had just been beaten senseless, but there were enough similarities between the two to make her go out of her way and stand up for him for the day. "The name," she said fiercely, unleashing all of her killing intent towards the group that had attacked the boy, "is Anko. Materashi. You forget it, and I'll have my snakes come after you." Her usual cockiness wasn't there, and was replaced by sheer determination to make sure that the boy's life would get better in some way after this. She knew his burden, his tenant, and she knew that his life was pretty bad for being known solely as the demon brat. She didn't want for him to go insane like the others, and since he held the most powerful of all 9, the damage from such a rampage would be pretty devastating. The stupidity of the villagers had made them believe that the Bey was simply the demon inside of him, and not his jailer. They all wanted revenge on him for one reason or another, but they fail to see that killing him will do absolutely nothing. The demon will regenerate in time and come back, punishing the village known as Konohagakure, or simply Konoha, for causing him so much trouble. As the silence had slowly passed, the villagers were becoming more and more scared of her. It was her specialty after all, and was one of the best in the torture and interrogation department, surpassed only by Ibiki Morino, who almost treated Anko like a daughter when nobody is around. "We're not afraid of you, snack." The man's words were interrupted by a kunai lodging itself inside of his throat, his body flying to the side and laying dead as he came in contact with ground. Anko smirked and jumped up into the air, landing just in front of the boy who she had been protecting. He was barely hanging on to life, but he was able to see everything going on around him. He couldn't move, much less speak, and simply lay there as the woman practically landed on top of him. The sudden landing had scared the villagers back a few more steps and her smirk had turned crazed. "What did I just tell you all? I may not have used my snakes that time, but it doesn't mean I won't kill you," she said in her usual cocky attitude, walking slowly over to the man who she had just killed and ripped her kunai from his throat, turning to the villagers and licking the blood from it so that the throwing dagger was clean. She had certain methods to scare the villagers, and by far that was one of her favorites just by how badly it scared everyone. "Now you better get going before Anbu shows up and you all end up like that guy," she said, pointing to the dead man that she had killed only seconds before. It didn't take long for the villagers to scatter from the alleyway, leaving just Anko, the boy, and the dead body. Her head snapped up to one of the darker shadows, and she narrowed her eyes, inspecting it closely. All right, dog face. Neko, why don't you tell me why you didn't swoop in and save the Gaki? Hell, I bet he'd like to know just as much as me. The Anbu with the dog mask sweat dropped as his nickname was mentioned. It wasn't only Anko who used it, but also the boy when he would occasionally see him. The one in the cat mask was forced to hold back a giggle as they both appeared from the shadows in front of the woman and the now unconscious boy. Inu had taken note of his current state and the pool of blood around him as well, his mask tilting downward to look at the boy, then back up to meet Anko's eyes. I'll tell you later, but you should get Naruto to the hospital. The fox doesn't seem to be cooperating this time. Inu spoke up, glancing at the boy once more to bring Anko's attention to him. Anko turned around and looked down at the boy, seeing the pool of blood surrounding him and going right through his clothes. Damn it, I don't think he'll be happy about hearing his clothes are covered in his own blood. She thought to herself in a light tone, trying to lighten up the mood just a bit. Her head turned back to the two Anbu and nodded to them, silently telling them to meet at the hospital. In the case that they weren't looking or just didn't understand, she said it aloud. I'll meet you at the hospital with the Gaki, just get him a room and get the doctors ready. The two nodded and shushined away, leaving a small trail of leaves where they once stood. Anko had a matter to take care of first before the hospital, and slowly picked up the unconscious boy in her arms. He couldn't be more than 6 at the time, since she had just quick thoughts in her head about when the Kibui attacked. She was right, almost 6 years ago the demon fox had attacked, and was eventually sealed inside the boy in her arms. She didn't really care if her trench coat got messy or not, since she had a complete closet filled with many more just like it. She jumped up into the air and landed on the roof once more, running at full speed to the Hokage tower. The Hokage sat quietly at his desk as he dealt with his lifelong adversary, eternal rival, and opponent, paperwork. Even when he was younger and during his initial run as the Hokage, he hated having to do all of the paperwork that was required for the position. More than once he had asked how his processor, the Yondaime, had been able to do all of this work and still managed to have the time to live happily with his wife. The question baffled him, but all thoughts were halted as the doors were blown open with Anko holding the young, bleeding, and unconscious boy in her arms. His eyebrows narrowed as he took in the sight. It had been one of the very few times that Anko had actually looked concerned about someone that wasn't herself, and he only had to guess about what had happened. The villagers have attacked Naruto-kun once more, it seems. It surely won't be the last, but it does seem different. Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage, spoke up, pausing from his late-night work and looking at the two of them. Anko nodded and glanced down at Naruto, who was in a state of deep sleep from the looks of it. The fox isn't healing his wounds like usual, so I had Neko and Dog Face go and get a room for him so the doctors could patch him up. Sarutobi sat there quietly for a moment and looked at Naruto, his surrogate grandson and the spitting image of the old Hokage's predecessor. He looked up at Anko, who had still seemed to be worried about him. Well, why are you here then? Having him here will do no good, Anko. We will speak once the hospital starts taking care of him. She knew that she couldn't say anything to make him talk to her now, so she simply complied with a nod and left the room, heading back outside in the dead of the night to the hospital, which was only a short distance away. Anko dashed out of the Hokage's tower and stayed on the ground this time rather than jumping onto the rooftops, weaving through the streets while keeping Naruto in her arms. She could feel his blood seeping through her jacket, but she didn't have any time to worry about it. She ran into the doors of the hospital where Inu and Neko were standing with a few doctors, some of them having a slight discomfort with having to patch up the demon child. One of the doctors simply motioned for them to follow him and the other doctors into the room. As reluctant as they were about treating Naruto, the Anbu made sure that they would give their full attention to the boy and care for him until he returns to his usual state. They had simply told the doctors that, Anko would be happy to help them with getting more jobs for the hospital, silently telling them that she'd kill them all off if they didn't comply. Reaching the operation room, one of the doctors took Naruto out of Anko's hand, much to her disliking. One of them even pushed her out of the room as soon as Naruto was in the other doctor's arms. The door to the room was shut in her face as all of the doctors scrambled into the room. She was mad that they weren't going to let her see the operation, but inside she knew that it was for the best. Sigh a small sigh, the snake mistress turned to the two Anbu and looked at them with as calm of a face as he could have at the moment. Alright, now tell me why you didn't go in and save the Gaki as soon as he was stabbed. I think that something like that should tell you that they mean to harm him. Her voice rose as she continued, inwardly unsure why she was stressing so much over the 6-year-old child. With a demon inside of him, he could probably protect himself by using its power, but he wasn't. And said demon wasn't even bothering with keeping its container alive. She paused with a curious look, and spoke up once more before either of the Anbu could. He doesn't know. Does he? She asked them, causing both masked ninja to shake their heads at the soon-to-be Jonin. She sighed once more and thought more on the subject. Of course he didn't know. He was only 6, he didn't go to school, and he didn't have anyone tell him about the Kyuubi, as were the Hokage's orders. He didn't know why he was being attacked constantly, and only knew that just about everyone in the village, save for a few people, hated him and his very existence. I'm going home, she told the two, sighing deeply and walking away. Go and get me when the Gaki wakes up. She knew that she could simply shush him away, but she just wanted to walk right now, and she was perfectly fine with that. Walking back to her home on the edge of the village, she tried her hardest, but couldn't stop thinking about one person. Naruto. She hadn't even truly spoken to him, and yet she was all he could think about. He had endured a similar pain to her, but she knew that his pain would be much worse than hers. When she was younger, she actually had people that she cared about, but now she didn't, as most people hated her for being associated with that snake bastard. He, however, never really knew people that loved him for him. Sure, the Ichirakus loved Naruto, and they did care about him, but they probably wouldn't be like that if he wasn't there almost every day eating ramen by the bucket. Other than the Hokage, those were the only two people that she knew of who actually treated Naruto like a human being. She could count herself onto the list, but this was the first time that she had actually interacted with him. He was probably the only person that she ever felt bad for, and it was driving her crazy. She just wanted to think about something else, but she just couldn't. While she hadn't ever directly interacted with him, she had seen the boy around the village a few times with that impossibly bright smile on his face. His emotions seemed to be infectious, as when he smiled, a few others smiled around him without knowing it, and when he was in pain, others suddenly felt the same. Anko groaned heavily as she stopped and turned around. The hospital, along with the academy, were connected to the Hokage's tower, and that was where she was going. While she couldn't just make the village stop beating him up, she could at least do her damn best to make sure that he could protect himself when the villagers formed a mob, and that would take some time. Reaching the office to the Hokage, Anko opened up the door to find that the god of shinobi was still at his desk, signing papers. What she didn't know was that he was watching her on her way back to her home with the use of his crystal ball. Anko, is there something else that we need to talk about tonight? He asked her, already having a good idea of what she was here for. Anko nodded at the Hokage and looked at him calmly. His light smile and calm demeanor told her everything that she wanted to know at the moment. She knew that Hiruzen was extremely pissed off on the inside, but wouldn't show it. He was angered at the village for treating Naruto the way that they have been, and right now it only took one small step in the wrong direction to bring on his wrath. Yes, Hokage-sama, she said back to him, thinking her thoughts over again to make sure that she would be making the right decision. I want to become Naruto's guardian. Sarutobi looked at Anko with a curious look, knowing that he had heard right, but wanting for her to say it again just so that they were both sure of what she said. He wanted to know why she suddenly wanted to watch over Naruto, as he knew that they never really talked to each other much. When the little blonde would report to the Hokage at least a few times a week, he would probably say something if a suggestively dressed woman were to talk to him if the case were to ever arise. You wish to become the guardian of Naruto. Tell me why. He didn't bother beating around the bush when it came to his surrogate grandson. Now usually, he would have instantly said no to anyone who would try to adopt or take in Naruto, but that was only because he feared that people would only do that in order to get closer to him to kill him. Anko was different, though. She obviously held no hate for the little boy, and had no reason to. She was an orphan before the Kyuubi attack, and in truth had no friends at the time, so nobody that she knew was hurt by the nine-tailed fox. Because he needs someone to look after him, she said hesitantly, still unsure about why she wanted to become the boy's guardian. She just knew that she had to do it, but she didn't at all know why. Yes, he does, but how does that reason make you any more qualified to look after him than the others who have asked the same things of me? He asked her, getting a look of surprise from the pineapple-haired Chunin. Others? What others and how many were there? She asked a bit frantically, questioning why the Hokage wouldn't let Naruto have a parent figure in his life. If I remember correctly, the Naras have asked me to give them custody of him, as well as Yamanaka Inoichi, and I believe even Choza has done the same as well. Hiyashi has asked to allow the Hyuga clan to watch over him, and surprisingly enough, an Inuzuka has asked the same. I believe. Anko couldn't believe what she was hearing. Those were all great clans, but why hadn't Sarutobi allowed them access to look after the boy? As if the Hokage were reading her mind, he spoke up once more just as she opened up her mouth and raised a hand to tell her to keep quiet until he was done. Before you ask any questions, I know that I should have let them take care of him, but I have no way of knowing if their intentions are true or not. I understand that I could have Inoichi come here and use his clan techniques, but what if they are conspiring against Naruto-kun? I cannot take risks like that, not with him. I've failed them far too much to let anything else come to him. Somewhat, Anko was able to understand what he was getting at. In a world where your killer could be your best friend, a little paranoia was always good for you. It wasn't all too surprising to hear that the Inoshika Cho trio all decided to house the boy, since when one made a decision, the other two usually agreed with it, especially when it was Shikaku who was making the decisions. However, she was more surprised to hear that the stoic Hyuga clan was also wishing to take in the boy. As far as she knew, no big numbers were taken off that clan during the attack 6 years ago, so maybe they weren't doing it out of revenge for their fallen clansmen. She could see the Inuzukas trying to get a hold of Naruto, since they had been known to pick up strays everyone once in a while. However, she didn't know what his last statements meant. She assumed that it had something to do with the Kyuubi, but his reasoning was much more than that. He had promised the boy's parents to look after Naruto, and he wasn't going to let them down any more than he already had. Anko stood there and thought heavily about why she wanted to watch over Naruto. It was true that she felt bad for him, and she could obviously relate to him, but she knew that there was more than just being able to relate to him. She started once more, but held back since she simply couldn't piece together the right combination of words that would explain why she wanted to watch over the little Uzumaki. Pictures of him flashed through her mind of the few times that she had seen him, smiling as brightly as the sun and not caring what others said or did to him. Surprisingly, she saw herself in him, always doing what she wanted without caring what the villagers did, always having a reason to eat their food of the gods, and hiding their pain under a mask of fake emotions. She wasn't sure how long she was standing there lost in thought, and the fact that it was the dead of the night didn't help at all either. Sarutobi sat there patiently and also had little of an idea of how much time had passed. It hadn't been more than several minutes, but the silence made it seem much more than that. Breaking the silence, the Hokage, and a good idea that he would share with Anko, and maybe that would give her some more time to think about her answer. He had already deemed her worthy of looking after his surrogate grandson, but he wanted for her to know why she wanted to take care of him, as he already had a pretty good idea of why she opted to do so. He wasn't the Hokage for nothing, and had good reasoning for holding such a title. He was just as smart as he was powerful, making him a dangerous foe in multiple instances. Anko, he said, bringing her attention back to the real word. Since it seems that the Kyuubi will not be helping Naruto this time, he will most likely be unconscious for a few days. Take this time to think about why you want to watch over him. When he wakes up, I will send one of my Anbu to get you and you can give me your reasoning then, okay? Nodding slowly, Anko said nothing to her Hokage as she stood there, still trying to think over why she wanted to watch over him. She knew that she was far from being the best person to look after a kid, and really, she wasn't even sure that she could do it. Sure, he had some spare money after missions, but she had heard that the Jinchuriki would put a restaurant out of business if he wanted to. She didn't have the money to pay for that kind of food, and although dango was her go-to food, she still had to eat healthily. She was a ninja after all, and she needed to be healthy at all times. If that is all, Anko. It is getting late, and I believe that you have some thinking to do. Take care, Sarutobi said to her, getting another nod from her before she walked out the door. From the calm and focused look she had on her face, it was easy to see that she was already thinking about this and taking it seriously as well. That was odd for Anko, especially considering that this was more about Naruto than it was about her. The Hokage knew, though, as the two of them were both equally important in this matter. He decided not to elaborate on it further, and instead rose from his seat, planning on retiring to his quarters for the night. Naruto groaned lowly as he opened his eyes. He had no idea where he was, but it obvious wasn't Konoha. He had been all over the village, and he had not once seen a sewer design like the one that he was currently in. Although the sewer appeared dirty and filthy, there was no scent whatsoever. The young blonde slowly picked himself up off of the ground and looked around some more. He had realized that there was no pain when he stood up, and upon inspecting his body, he was bruise-free, something that was usually common for him, but still off. Usually there would be very light and small markings from the previous cuts, but his body was perfectly fine. Suddenly, a threatening aura of power made itself known to Naruto, causing him to flinch and take a step back. After a moment of silence, there was a low and deep laugh coming from afar. Naruto wanted to know where he was and how he was perfectly healed, so he followed the sound of the voice where a large gate with a piece of paper on it stood in his way from continuing further. Naruto was small enough to pass through the gates, but he didn't as of yet. He didn't know what was on the other side, and he was being unusually cautious about the ordeal. Suddenly, a deep voice spoke to him. My jailer decides to visit me at last, to what do I owe the honor? The voice was obvious sarcastic, and although nothing could be seen from the other side of the gates, Naruto knew that whoever was speaking to him was on the other side. The young blonde took a small step over to the gate, now examining the piece of paper with the kanji of seal on it. Naruto didn't know what to say to the voice, as he wasn't sure what it was talking about in the slightest. He had just been called a jailer, but it made no sense to him. He didn't own a prison, and had no relations to one. Deciding to ask the obvious question, Naruto took another small step towards the gate. Who are you? A deep and low laugh could be heard from the other side of the gates, and as time passed, it slowly got louder and louder. Who am I? Whoami? I am the great Kyuubi no Yoko. Its thunderous laugh could be heard all throughout the sewers, causing Naruto to take a small step back. Suddenly, its laughing ceased, and there was nothing but silence for a moment. Slowly, the demon fox walked up to the bars and looked down at its container, an evil smirk on its face. In reality, the Kyuubi had actually called Naruto into the seal, and only asked the first question to humor itself. Naruto didn't say anything to the demon fox, his eyes wide and his jaw just slightly down. He had heard about the demon fox attack before when he was sneaking around, but he had no idea that he was connected to it. It all made sense now that he came to the realization of what was going on. Suddenly, his jaw clenched, and his eyebrows narrowed. The tailed beast. So you're the reason I always get beat up. Because I have you locked up in me. Baka fox. Why don't you just leave? He was clearly mad at the fox, but the beast didn't seem offended. The QB understood the hate that came from the village, as it did attack it 6 years ago, and did a fair amount of damage. To be fair though, it wasn't really it that was attacking. The QB knew that someone was controlling him to attack Konoha. If it was that easy, Kit, I would have already left your body by now. We are bound until your natural death. The QB was getting off track, and shook its head slightly at the boy who was looking at him questioningly, wondering what it was talking about. That is not why I called you here, though. I want to make 2 things perfectly clear. It spoke seriously as it practically glared down at the boy, but not sending any killing intent his way. Naruto remained quiet, wanting to know what it was going to say. The first, I did not attack Konoha out of my free will. I was controlled into doing so and had no choice of my actions. The QB wanted to make it perfectly clear that it did not intentionally attack Konoha, and by the nod that Naruto gave it, he seemed to have understood that only someone with an impossible amount of power would be able to do such a thing. The second thing is that I do not plan on having a weak container. As a Jinchuriki, you are expected to use my power, but I am expecting you to be able to fight your own battles without even thinking about calling on my power. There isn't going to be someone to jump in like what happened just moments ago. It smirked evilly at Naruto as it remembered the provocatively dressed purple-haired woman, who swooped in and saved Naruto and it. Naruto wasn't unconscious when Anko had dropped in and saved him, but he wasn't able to look up at her, and her voice was dulled to the point where he could hardly hear anything. He knew that he was lucky for her to come along, and wanted to find a way to thank her if he ever saw her again. So, where are we? The QB should have expected this question, as it had seen Naruto's memories, and he hadn't leaned a whole lot in the 6 years that he had been alive, so the great beast decided to explain it to him. This is your subconscious, the mindscape. With enough training, you can reshape this world with a simple thought, and maybe then I can finally get a nice place to live for once. It muttered the last part as it looked down at Naruto, slowly laying down to attempt to become level with the boy. But enough of that. The QB spoke, making Naruto look up at it wondering what it was about to say next. You need your rest, and let this be a reminder that you cannot rely on me to keep you alive. I expect you to become strong, and when I find you worthy, I will allow you to use my powers. Naruto nodded at the demon fox and it nodded back to him. The young boy watched as the world around him became black, and smiled to himself knowing that he had possibly just made 2 friends. The first one was the QB itself, who didn't seem as bad as he thought it was going to be, and the second one was the person who had saved him. He knew that he would have to ask the Hokage who had saved him, but that could wait until he woke up. Back out in the real world, 2 Anbu watched over the boy, making sure that nobody would come in and attack him while in this state. It was so odd seeing him there, not being healed, and not smiling in the least. As if Naruto were reading their minds, his face cracked a slight smile that could be seen by the 2 Anbu. Without knowing it themselves, the 2 of them smiled as well. The one with the cat mask dropped down from her position on the ceiling, slowly walking over to Naruto. Inu simply watched as Neko stood at the side of his bed, examining his face, seeing if the smile that they had detected was actually there or not. It had only been a few hours since Anko had dropped him off, but it seemed like an eternity since she had last talked. Quote, I guess we should take better care of him now that Anko seems a little protective over him, huh Inu? She was only given a nod in response, but it was all that was needed. They both knew that Anko would chop their heads off for not protecting him right, and she would make sure that it was as slow and painful as possible for the both of them. Both of them shuddered at the thought of Anko torturing them, and silently decided to be more protective of the boy. Lying down on his bed, the aged Hokage sighed lightly as he looked up at the ceiling, thinking over the recent events involving his surrogate grandson. After 6 years of violence and torture, Sarutobi was finally starting to see that the village wasn't going to even begin accepting Naruto unless he proved it to them all, and they weren't going to make it easy. While he did outlaw people speaking openly about the Kyuubi, as well as doing what he could to watch over Naruto, but it would not be nearly enough. He knew all too well that Naruto was attacked almost constantly, and even with Anbu watching over him, they did not do their job completely. They did come in and save him, but only when he had an inch of his life left. They never stepped in when the attack started, and he knew that he was going to have to start changing a lot of things. His relaxed gaze turned into a cold stare as he looked up at the ceiling and thought about Naruto's current condition. If he wasn't as lenient as he was, maybe it would have never come to this. Maybe he would have been respected like the Kumo Jinchuriki he had heard about, who also had close relations to the Kage of his village. If only Sarutobi had been a better Kage, then it was possible that Naruto wouldn't have had to face all of the hatred that he currently did. He could have just taken him into the Sarutobi clan, as nobody would have messed with him then. For the sake of Naruto, he was going to be a better Hokage. Sarutobi wasn't the only person who was thinking about Naruto, as Anko was doing the same on her walk back home, as well as the half hour that she spent while laying in bed. She didn't know why she wanted to look after Naruto, but something inside of her told her that it had to be done. When she looked around her house, she knew well that it wasn't the best place for a child to grow up in, and decided to start cleaning up, at least a little bit. On the outside, she wasn't the best choice for being a mother. Even she knew that she wasn't parent material, but something inside of her was telling her that it would be best for the both of them if she were to take him in, and it wasn't the dark whisperings of the curse mark this time. It sounded like her own voice, and didn't remind her at all about the man who had put the seal on her. He had placed the curse seal on her and later told her that she didn't have the drive to use it, and abandoned her and left her for dead. She idolized the man because he was all that she had, but in the end she threw her away like a piece of trash. By this time, she was unsure of if she was dreaming or not, but watched as the events unfolded in front of her. She didn't know where she was, but it appeared to be just a plain forest in the land of fire. Naruto was next to her with a smiling face, and in front of the two of them was another person. It was currently dark out, and she wasn't able to see the face of the third person, but she knew that it was Naruto next to her because of the kind warmth that he constantly gave off. Naruto took a small step towards the person in front of him and smiled at them. Anko had assumed that the person smiled back from the slight tilt of the head, but was overall unsure of who it was or who it could have been. Breaking the silence, Naruto took another step forward and kept his eyes on her person in front of him. "Thank you, sensei. You're the coolest," he said brightly, getting a nod from the person. Anko looked at them curiously and replayed the sentence in her mind, completely unable to hear the name of the person. It was as if Naruto's voice was completely muted when he had spoke the name of his apparent sensei. The person nodded and replied back, but to Anko, it wasn't any recognizable voice that she had ever heard. In fact, it was the voices of many people what she had heard before, all speaking different words, but acting as if they were one. "Thank you, Naruto. I'm glad that you came to join me in my trip, but I am also disappointed because of it," the voice said sadly, looking down at the ground. Naruto frowned and took another step over to the person. "What's wrong, sensei? Did I do something wrong?" he asked the person, his voice not being muted because he didn't speak the name of his sensei. As both he and Anko looked at the person in confusion, it nodded as it kept its head down. "Yes, Naruto, you did do something wrong. You misused my teachings," the voice now said coldly, striking Naruto quickly. Naruto was fortunate enough to move so that she strike wouldn't hit his head, but the hand of the person hit his shoulder instead, causing him to spin backwards and hit a tree. Naruto grunted with pain and kept his eyes on his sensei as it moved closer to him. Anko could only watch as the person picked up Naruto and looked him straight in the eyes. She had no access to her voice, and her legs were stuck to the ground, only allowing her upper body to move. She had tried to scream and yell and get his attention, but neither Naruto or his sensei acknowledged her existence. What did I do? I'm sure that I can make it up. I didn't do anything at all. He tried to tell his sensei, but the person didn't do anything other than backing its head with Naruto's, then dropping the boy as soon as it pulled its head back. Although Naruto was losing consciousness, the person spoke to Naruto in the same cold voice as before. Exactly. You did nothing. You are a disgrace and a monster. Even with the power you contain, you are nothing. Useless. When they find you, I will be long gone, and I expect for whoever is looking for me will kill you just to get you out of everyone's way. The being said as it kicked Naruto in the head and ran away at speeds that only a Sannin could have. Anko was enraged at the person who hurt Naruto, but also worried since she knew whoever would find him would surely finish the job. Suddenly, her legs began to move again, and she quickly ran over to Naruto and held him in her arms. He was a little taller than she had remembered him to be, but it still felt like him. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there, crying and trying to wake him up, but the next thing she knew he was back in her bed, covered in sweat and the covers that she was sleeping under now on the ground. The memories were too real for her, and she replayed them in her mind constantly. Naruto looked so heartbroken when his sensei had told him that it was disappointed. She assumed that he had put a lot of trust into his sensei, and all of a sudden she was out cold and left to die. Her eyes widened even further as she came to the realization that it was impossibly similar to when she had last seen Orochimaru, but he was in her place, and his sensei was literally anyone, as all of the voices she had heard were from people that she knew. She struggled to continue thinking about it, but she knew that it was the key to answering the question that her Hokage had given her. It was so much like her own ordeal, but at the same time it was different. She knew inside that she couldn't let something like that happen to him, and she knew that she couldn't let him turn out like she did. As she told herself the night before, she began to clean up her apartment after eating breakfast, planning on getting the place clean enough for another person to move in. Anko hoped that the Hokage would allow her to take in the little Gaki, and spent more than enough time practicing what she was going to say while cleaning. After having felt that her apartment was fine for the time being, he smiled to herself and took a brief shower before getting new clothes and heading out. Even though she appeared tough as nails and borderline psychotic on the outside, she wasn't really as mean as she seemed. She had to make an image for herself to prove the village wrong about her, and if that meant not being able to look at things that were even a tiny bit frilly in public, then so be it. It was still fairly early in Kanagaku, and although Anko usually wouldn't be up at the current hour, but she had business to attend to. He had some things to talk to the Hokage about, as well as the fact that she needed to see if Naruto had gotten better since the night before. Kakashi and Yugao had both told her that the Kyuubi wasn't helping Naruto's healing process, and she only hoped that the fox would finally decide to help now. While busy with her thoughts, Anko wasn't able to see the young girl that she had just bumped into. Looking down at the girl with a bit of surprise, she kept her face somewhat blank while she studied her. The girl did the same and said nothing, but her face said that she did recognize Anko. Anko looked down at the girl and couldn't help but notice the two large, red fang-like tattoos that were on both sides of her face. She currently had 3 pups with her, with one of them being on her head, another on her shoulder, and the last on the ground right next to her feet. Despite not having wild hair, slit eyes, or extended canines, Anko knew well that the girl was an Inuzuka. While the Inuzuka girl was about to say something, Anko placed a hand over her mouth just as her lips opened, and Anko shook her head softly. Quiet, she said simply, giving the girl a more serious look. She couldn't place the girl's looks anywhere, and sighed in defeat only seconds after ordering the girl to stay quiet. The snake mistress removed her hand from the girl's mouth and looked at her plainly. Don't know you. You look a little too normal to be an Izuka. No crazy hair, no crazy eyes, and no giant teeth. What's your name? She asked to the girl, getting the Inuzuka to smile slightly. I'm Hana Inuzuka. You're Mitarashi Anko, right? She asked, getting a nod from the older woman. Anko wasn't sure how Hana knew her name, but before she could ask, Hana spoke again. Ka-san said something about you. I can't remember what it was, but she was smiling, so it was a good sign. Anko was now wondering who her mother was, and lucky for her, Hana didn't interrupt her this time when she asked a question. Who is your mother, and how would? She's Sum, huh? Anko said flatly, knowing that there was no other Inuzuka that she knew around her own age group, and she should have known that it was Sum's kid from the start. Hana simply nodded at Anko with a small smile. She is, and I'm sorry to leave, but I need to go and see Hokage-sama. Hana told Anko, snapping her fingers to get the pup that was on the ground to pay attention and follow her. Anko watched as the young Inuzuka walked away from her into the Hokage Tower. It was a coincidence that she was also going there, but to not seem like a weird stalker, she decided to change her route slightly to head on her way over to the hospital to check up on a certain young blonde. Walking through the doors of the hospital, Anko lightly gazed around the lobby before heading to the front desk. The lobby was quiet, as only a few people were seated. Most of the chairs in the room were empty, and Anko assumed that the people there were sitting down because they needed to get checked, or something along those lines. For the moment, it wasn't her business, so she simply continued walking to the desk. A young woman was seated on the other side of the desk, going through a rather small book. The woman's onyx eyes moved quickly past each line of text, taking up as much information as she could at the rate she was reading. The woman didn't notice Anko standing at the desk, and only took note of the purple-haired woman after a random hand forcibly closed the book. An eep could be heard from the woman at the desk, her rolling chair moving back only slightly. Quickly, the woman set her book down and nodded at Anko. Sorry about that, can I help you? Anko nodded in understanding and clanked over at the clipboard with the sign-in sheet for the visitors. I'm here to see a friend. I brought him in last night, and I want to see if he's gotten any better. She spoke in a calm and even tone, one that she didn't use all that often. The woman across from her nodded quickly and swiveled her chair so that she could grab the clipboard before handing it to Anko. The woman was curious as to who she was seeing, as she knew of Anko, but didn't know that she was good friends with anyone other than Kurenai Yuhi and Yugao Azuki. If you don't mind me asking, who are you seeing? Anko looked up from the clipboard after signing in and paused for a moment. She wasn't sure how the woman would react to finding out that she was seeing Naruto, but mental shook those thoughts. Screw it. If she gets all prissy because I'm coming to visit him, then so be it. She thought to herself as she allowed the pen to fall in between her fingers and onto the desk which the clipboard was resting on. Naruto Uzumaki, she said blandly, expecting for the woman's mood to suddenly change. Instead, she smiled sadly at Anko and remembered what she had heard just as she punched in for the day. I heard that he was getting better, but he's still in pretty bad shape. He isn't in critical anymore, so that's good. Anko's eyes widened at the woman. She was one of the extremely few people who actually didn't see Naruto as the demon fox that was sealed inside of him. Immediately, she squinted her eyes and looked at the woman, wondering why she didn't seem to hate Naruto like the rest of the village. Why are you treating him differently than most of the village? She asked, getting the woman to tilt her head in curiosity. Normally, Anko would be thankful to find out that someone else saw Naruto as a person, but the woman seemed like a civilian woman, or a rookie chunin. What do you mean? She asked, curious about what she was talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There's no way you haven't heard about his tenant before. Everyone in the village knows about the fox, and you're acting like you've never heard of it. She had to keep herself quiet. She couldn't make a scene in the hospital lobby, and she knew that well. Oh, the woman simply said, taking back at clipboard and inspecting the most recent entry. Well, you see, I just don't think that it's possible for the Kyuubi to take the former Naruto. If it had, the demon chakra would be felt throughout Konoha. When I went past his room this morning, I felt a little bit of it, but if he were actually the fox, there wouldn't be two distinct kinds of chakra coming from him. She said cheerily, getting a questioning look from Anko. The woman then rose from her chair and leaned across the counter and whispered to Anko. Between you and me, I think that the Kyuubi is sealed inside of him. He could have had some of the demon chakra implanted in him at a young age, but I don't think that's possible. Anko had so many questions for the woman, but there were far too many to ask right now. Are you not from around here or something? Anko asked, trying to be as calm as possible with the woman. The nurse nodded and sat back down in her chair, smiling at Anko. How do you know? I spent most of my life traveling with my family. Ka-san taught me how to be a med-nin, and Tu-san protected us while we traveled around the border. I've only been in Konoha for a month, and I really like it here. Anko sighed to herself and looked down at the ground. She picked her head up once more as the nurse spoke again. Naruto is in room 304. Hokage-sama wanted him in a room high off the ground so that he couldn't escape through the window. Sorry for keeping you so long. The purple-haired woman nodded slowly and walked away from the desk, leaving the kind woman to her own devices. She was a little odd, but Anko didn't mind that at all. Even though she only met the med-nin, she had a feeling that she could be trusted. She was certainly smarter than just about all of the civilians in Konoha, and that was welcomed and appreciated. Anko walked through the white halls of the hospital and made her way to the third floor, where she assumed Naruto was put after he left the ER. She could only hope that the fox was cooperating now, and from what the woman at the counter said earlier, she was being led to believe that Naruto was being healed by the previously mentioned fox. She quietly read off the numbers on the doors as she passed them, stopping as she found the room that Naruto was apparently in at the moment. It didn't seem like that woman would lead her on and tell her to go to the wrong room, but one could never know. With a light sigh escaping her lips, Anko reached her hand out and grabbed the handle of the door, twisting it and pulling it in her direction to open it. Walking in, the first thing she saw was the blindingly bright blonde hair of the young Uzumaki, who was resting peacefully in his bed. A soft smile graced her lips at the sight, and she walked over to the side of the bed, pulling out a chair to sit on. Wake up soon, Gaki. Because when you do, your life's getting a whole lot better, Anko thought to herself as he sat next to Naruto, simply watching him inhale and exhale. He looked so much better than he did when she had found him, and she knew that only the Kyuubi could have done something like that. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there, just watching over the boy, but suddenly, she spoke up and broke the silence. You don't have to sit in the shadows like that. It's probably pretty uncomfortable from where you two are. Neither of the Anbu were really surprised to hear that Anko knew that they were there, but they were both curious about how long she had known on their presence. The Inu and Neko masked Anbu left their stations in the shadows, knowing well that Anko would pull them out if need be. Suddenly, Anko smiled sweetly at the two of them and talked in a voice far too sweet for comfort. While Neko wasn't as affected as Inu was, she was still quite scared of the Chunin woman in front of her. Now, tell me exactly why you two didn't jump in and save the Gaki as soon as it started getting dicey. Neither of them had anything to say to Anko. They were both ashamed for not helping him sooner, and had no reason to not protect him other than, just because. Anko understood this, and after a while she broke the silence once more. Under no means was she completely forgiving them for what they did. She was pissed at them to no extent, and she wanted their masked heads on spikes. She kept that to herself, however, and tried to stay calm. Alright then, just do your damn jobs the next time this happens, otherwise I'll have to step in again, I may even chew the two of you out to dolphin. Her sweet smile quickly shifted to a shit-eating grin as soon as the dolphin Anbu was mentioned, making both Inu and Neko pale under their masks. Dolphin had only been in the Anbu for a little more than a year, but that wasn't to say that he wasn't skilled. With his speed and tracking skills, he's probably one of the few that could ever catch Naruto, if the case were to ever rise. He wasn't an Anbu captain like Inu was, but Dolphin sure acted like one. He had sparred with Inu a few times, and the dog-masked ninja would win by smaller margins each time. At the rate he was at, he'd be equal to Kakashi in a few years. You don't have to do that, Anko. We've learned our lesson. He'd have our heads for not doing our jobs correctly. Neko spoke up, her mask directed at Anko. Neither of the purple-haired women understood how they could talk perfectly fine under those fairly thick Anbu masks, but Neko had assumed that it was some kind of seal or something. She's right. We'll be watching him better from now on. Inu spoke as well and paused for a moment, thinking about why Anko was there. Why are you here, Anko? Something important must have happened for you to go this far for him. While some would have taken that as some form of an insult, Anko simply nodded. She understood what Kakashi was getting at. She was always as tough as nails, and hardly ever cared about anyone other than herself. She didn't favor kids in the slightest, and she was well known for being bloodthirsty. That was only her mask, and if those were her true emotions, then she probably would have gotten mad at the silver-haired Anbu for saying that. A lot of things happened, Kakashi. That's all you need to know for now. Her smile disappeared, and was replaced with a calm and serious look. Her voice also lost most of its usual cockiness and power. Kakashi sighed and shook his head. It might be just the four of us in here, but you know the rules. You can't use my name when I have the mask on. Anko then smirked at her mask-wearing friends and stood still. You're right. Sorry about that dog face. I'll make sure to remember that. Her cocky tone was back, and both Inu and Neko sighed at the smirking young woman. It was obvious that she didn't want to into the details of what made her go to the hospital, so they kept quiet about it. All three conscious heads turned to the door as someone knocked on it from the other side. Anko stood up and walked over to the door and opened it, revealing another Anbu. The mask turned to face the woman at the door, and the Anbu bowed lightly. Anko-san, Hokage-sama is wondering if you've gathered your thoughts about taking in the Uzumaki boy. I understand that it's been less than a day, but the Hokage believes that you already have your reasoning. The voice from the third Anbu sounded blank and monotone, but Anko still knew that whoever was behind the mask didn't favor Naruto all that much by the pause that he made when announcing his name. Anko nodded to him and glanced back at Inu and Neko, who were both looking at her curiously. Tell him that I'll be on my way as soon as I'm done here. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes at the most. The Anbu quietly said, "Hi," and bowed once more before leaving. Anko turned back around to her two masked friends and sighed audibly. You heard him. I asked the Hokage if I could watch over the boy. I'm going to leave it at that for now, she told them, walking back over to her seat and sitting down next to Naruto. The purple-haired woman smiled at him kindly before getting up and walking out the door without another word. In this time, Inu and Neko both got back into their spots in the shadows. Wake up soon, Gaki. It didn't take long for Anko to arrive at the Hokage Tower, as the tower was connected to the hospital and it was only a short walk. Because of what the Anbu had told her, she already knew why the Hokage was summoning her, and she knew his reasoning for calling her to him only a few hours after they had last spoken. She was sure that she knew his reasons for sending the Anbu, but there was always a chance of her being wrong. There had been several times in her life where she believed one thing, and another thing happened. Being wrong was always a possibility. Entering the Hokage Tower, Anko said nothing to the secretary, as Anko was supposed to be there, and wasn't asking to see the village leader. She didn't like the secretary, even though she didn't really show any hate towards Anko. The snake mistress just had an odd feeling about her, and decided not to talk to her unless she was needed, which was highly unlikely. The two simply shared a glance and that was that. Anko walked up to the Hokage's office at her own pace and was faced with the Anbu from earlier, the one that had told her about her summons to the office. Apparently he was supposed to escort her to the office, but he and Sarutobi knew that she didn't really need an escort of any kind. The woman eyed the Anbu suspiciously and walked over to the door, her eyes never leaving his mask. Finally speaking up, curiosity was obvious in her voice. Why are you here? Don't have anything against you, but shouldn't you be back at your post or something, not just standing around here? The Anbu didn't move, but still replied to the curious woman. Hokage-sama told me to stay here and not let anybody other than you inside. Since you're discussing matters about Uzumaki, he wants his office guarded just in case anybody overhears or tries to listen in. Privacy seals will be put in place when you walk in, allowing you to speak at any volume you with without attracting attention. I see. Well, thanks, was all that Anko said before knocking on the door to the office. After a brief moment, a faint enter could be heard from the other side. The doors opened to reveal the Hokage sitting like usual, looking at Anko with a calm smile. Something seemed different to her. The atmosphere of the room wasn't like it was before. She couldn't explain it, but something had indeed changed within the last 13 hours. Before we get to Naruto-kun, Anko, I think that there is another matter that we should discuss while you're here. The Hokage said to her calmly, looking at her and examining her face. Curiosity was written all over it as she stepped closer, the door shutting behind her. Anko wondered what he was talking about, as not much of anything had happened between her saving Naruto and now, but she was going to listen to her leader. And what would that be? She asked curiously, preferring to stand at the moment rather than sit. The atmosphere still felt odd to her, and she didn't want to get comfy at the moment. Hana Inuzuka came into my office a few minutes ago to give her report of her most recent mission. The rest of her team is relaxing from their mission, and she took it upon herself to give the report to me. The Sarutobi elder paused to allow the information sink in, his smile widening as the look on Anko's face told him that she had recently encountered the girl. I see. Did something go wrong? I don't see the reason for telling me all of this. She wasn't really sure why the Hokage was talking about the girl to her, but she was sure that he was getting to that. Nothing went wrong, but she told me that she was held back from doing so because of an odd, purple-haired woman that dressed weird and smelled of snakes if I remember her words right. I just wanted to clarify with you that a meeting between the two of you took place before she came to the tower. A small smile could be seen on the face of the elder Sarutobi as he looked at Anko, whose eyes widened as a look of anger spread across her face. Anko was more amused than mad at what Hana had said to the Hokage, and only put on the look of anger as a show for the silent Anbu hiding in the shadows. Not long after, though, she calmed down and smiled at the Hokage. She nodded to him before speaking. Yeah, I ran into her earlier today, but I don't think that I held her back long enough for her to have the need to apologize to you. Sarutobi nodded back to her with his usual smile and remembered what had happened once the Inuzuka girl apologized to him. I agree with you. There wasn't really any reason for her to apologize, but she insisted on doing so. He paused once more before clearing his throat, bringing his thoughts to the main topic of their meeting. I do understand that it had been a day, Anko, but I know how fast you think, and I assume that you have come to your decision. He said to her, getting the snake mistress to don a calm and serious look as she looked at the leader of the village. She hesitantly nodded to him, pausing because of doubt. Can I really do this? Killing people is one thing, but taking care of a kid is another. Not to mention one who is probably a mental wreck on the inside. She thought to herself, refusing to speak at the moment. She didn't think that she was ready to take care of him, despite all of her earlier thoughts. She was a mess, even under the mask that she hid under. She didn't think that she was ready, but she had to be. Nobody else would care for the boy in the way that he needed to be cared for, and Anko Mitarashi wasn't one to back down from things that even Cage feared. A fire lit in her eyes as she gave the Hokage a look of determination. Her nervousness and fear was gone, now replaced by shining determination. I will take care of Naruto Uzumaki. The Hokage's smile widened as he heard those words, and the old man pulled out a scroll from his desk. It was the document that would legally sign Naruto over to her, and all he needed is her signature and a blood sample. The sample was a new addition, as it was just to make sure that it was actually her signing the paper instead of someone else. Hiruzen placed the scroll on the desk and motioned for Anko to take it. While she moved forward and took the scroll, the old man moved a brush over to her so that she could sign the document. Anko read through the paper carefully to make sure that everything was in order. Naruto would be moved out of his currently residence, and would be placed wherever Anko lived. She would become his guardian until he became of age or reached the Chunin rank. After that, he would be allowed to move out to continue his life, but she would still be his guardian, and would be referred to if anything were to happen to him. She nodded as she reached the end of the paper, but stopped and looked back at the last few lines. The guardians of Naruto Uzumaki will be given full access to the clan and all of its belongings once Naruto Uzumaki reaches the Chunin rank. They will also hold the council seat if Naruto Uzumaki is unable to attend. She looked up at the Hokage curiously, and the old man chuckled as he knew what she was curious about. That will be explained later, Anko. If you wish to know more about the segment, please meet me later, when the walls are less likely to have ears. He spoke carefully as he pulled out another scroll, watching Anko nod and take the brush to sign her name. He moved slightly when she bit her thumb to draw blood, instead of using a kunai or other bladed weapon. He watched as her blood dripped from her thumb to the paper glowing for a moment before returning to normal. Anko was once again curious as she watched the paper glow. She assumed that it was a seal of some sort, and something else would have happened if it wasn't her blood that was dropped on the paper. She said nothing as she rolled the scroll back up and placed it back on the desk, taking the other scroll from Hiruzen. Read that one when you have the time, Anko. Not here, he said to her, getting her to nod slowly as she put the scroll away. Anko and the Hokage waited in silence for several minutes, the former thinking about what she would need to do to take care of Naruto. The old Sarutobi simply watched Anko for a moment before giving her another smile. I'm glad that we were able to give Naruto a home. I'm sure that you have things to do before Naruto is released from the hospital, so I'd hate to be keeping you. Good day, Anko. He spoke to her, getting her to snap out of her thoughts and re-enter reality. Yes, Hokage-sama, I'll see you later, she said, giving him a short bow before turning away from him and walking out the door. Anko was curious to know what was in the other scroll that Hiruzen had given her. The way he spoke after she had reread the last lines of the first scroll and how he spoke after she had gotten the second one was odd, and she replayed the words over in her head. Where the walls don't have ears, read it when I have time. It's obvious that he wanted to speak privately about what those last sentences meant, and this scroll has something to do with it, but what kind of secret would warrant that much caution from the Hokage? Sure, he might be old, but he can still kick Major if he needed to. She wanted to look at the scroll right now, but even though she wanted to, she knew that it would better to wait until she was back home. She had planned to do a couple of things first, but they could wait. Walking back to her house, Anko was left alone to be with her thoughts. She still had doubts about raising Naruto, but she didn't know who else was going to do it, and she couldn't just pass him on to be someone else's problem. She had been so occupied with her thoughts that she didn't realize that she was home until she almost ran into the front door. The house that Anko lived in wasn't run down, it wasn't a mess, and it wasn't anywhere near what people expected from her. The snake woman had a fairly nice house that was near the edge of the village. It had a simply tan coloring to the outside walls, and it was for the most part bare with the exception of a few windows and the door. The young woman unlocked the door without any problems and closed it behind her. Just about everyone assumed that she lived in a hellhole with torturing devices, rotting pieces of flesh, and many other inhumane things. Actually, it was a fairly nice and well-furbished home. Tan was the primary color, with grays, blacks, and purples in various other places to keep it from being monotonous. Many of the pictures on the walls of her with her two main friends, Yugao Azuki, and Kurenai Yuhi. She could be seen smiling, laughing, and even a few not long after the results of her pranks. While she didn't prank all that much, when she did, the town was often in ruins because of them. Flopping down on her couch, Anko pulled out the scroll from her trench coat and opened it up, reading through it slowly to not miss anything important. She could have easily read through it quickly and still memorize all of it, but she just wanted to read it slowly at the moment. Anko, I'm so glad that you were willing to become Naruto's guardian. I know that you weren't happy when finding out that I had turned down many capable clans who also wanted to watch over Naruto, but I do have my reasons. Without doubt, I'm sure that you noticed the last few lines of the document. I hand-wrote this document myself, because it is far more important than people will realize. I want to talk more about it with you tonight at the Hokage mansion, where I'm sure that nobody will be able to listen into the conversation except for us. I know that it seems a little excessive, but it is absolutely necessary. I'm going to have Naruto stay at the hospital for a few more days, as it should give you time to prepare living with him. He needs a parent in his life, Anko. Despite what you think, I'm sure that you can be there for Naruto when he needs you. Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage. The sun was finally starting to set in the village of Konohagakure, and very few people could be happier about that than Mitarashi Anko. There were several reasons behind her joy, the main one being that she could soon go to the Hokage to talk to him about something that seemed to concern Naruto and a council seat. The precautions that he took to make sure that only Anko saw the message that he had given her were enough to tell her that this was important, and in the wrong hands this information could cause chaos. While thinking of that, she also wondered why Hiruzen had chosen her out of all people to watch over Naruto. She didn't even truly know why she had offered to become his guardian. As the day passed, she thought more about it, and believed that she was close to coming to a conclusion. The Snake Mistress was one of the few people who could truly connect with Naruto. She had felt the village's wrath much like he did, and knew what it was like to be alone. She saw a bit of herself in him, and didn't want for him to be corrupted by the village any more than he already was. She could see his mask as if it were a physical object, and she knew that underneath that mask was a hurt and tormented boy who was treated badly for reasons he didn't understand. All it takes is one well-placed strike to shatter his mask and his soul to reveal the monster they took him as. If no one intervened, it was only a matter of time before the Kyuubi took over his body and decimated Konoha. She understood his pain, and she could put an end to it. This had been one of the longest days of her life. While she did kill some time by buying food for both Naruto and herself, she had spent most of the day cleaning her house to the point where a single speck of dust wasn't on the ground, and waiting as patiently as she could for the day to pass. Getting ready to grab some dinner for both her and possibly the boy she would now be raising, Anko heard a knock at the door. It could have only been a few select people, as nobody really came out to see her. When she got to the door, the Snake Mistress opened the door to see her red-eyed friend on the other side. She was dressed like the normally was, with her wild and long black hair going down her back and her dress mimicking the thorns of a rose. Judging by her slightly fatigued appearance, as well as the fact that she was lightly panting, Anko could tell that she had run from wherever she was before to Anko's home. Kurenai, what brings you over to my little neck of the urban woods? Anko asked with obvious curiosity. A cat told me that you were becoming a parent. She replied with a rather bland tone of voice, but a small hint of something else was also in her voice. Anko couldn't tell exactly what it was, but she was sure that it was excitement. Anko nodded slowly, cursing under her breath at Yugao. Yugao didn't gossip all that much, but when her friends were involved, the chances of her talking about something raised noticeably. With Naruto involved as well, the chances were raised even higher. What of it? She replied simply, unhappy with Yugao at the moment. She was going to get her back, and she was going to get her back good. Kurenai slowly showed herself in. She and Anko had been friends for so long that just appearing at one another's house wasn't uncommon. A few things, actually. She said calmly. I don't want to be mean, Anko, but are you sure that you can do this? You've worked so hard to raise people's respect for you, and you'd be back at square one or even lower if this goes through. Also, you aren't really known for being friendly to kids, or most genin for that matter. The Ice Queen of Konoha was using her analytic voice, and she really wasn't trying to be mean to her friend. She was right though, on both points. If she were to take in Naruto, their combined reputation would be horrible, and she wasn't really fond of children. However, these were the wrong details to focus on. Anko knew better than to take what Kurenai said directly. She might have been using her analytic voice, but there was always more to it than that when she was involved. Anko shook her head at her friend, following her into her house and closing the door behind her. I'll be fine, Nai-chan. And you're going to have to be more persuasive if you want to take care of him as practice before you get busy with Asuma. She finished with a smirk and a teasing voice. With Anko's last words, Kurenai blushed lightly and shook her head at her friend. That's not what this is about. Anko, taking care of a kid is a huge responsibility, and with all of the life-threatening missions you take, every day you spend with him might be your last. Yes, if you go through with this, helping you take care of him would help me for the future, but everything you've done, everything you've worked for, will have been for nothing. Anko gritted her teeth in anger. Her friend meant good, but she wasn't doing any. She was insulted by her friend, the person that was supposed to be there for her when she needed her most. And now that she did, she wasn't there for her. Then so be it. She practically shouted. He is a time bomb, Kurenai. He smiled his way through every cruel and painful day, but what happens when he snaps? All of the anger that the village had showed him will be returned tenfold and with the rage of the Kyuubi to go along with it. I can't let that happen. I can't let him turn into what I almost was. She finished in a whisper, and her eyes were fixed on the ground as she thought back to when she had almost fully become the deadly and bloodthirsty woman everyone believed that she was. Of course, she was actually like that, but not to the extent that she showed everyone. It was silent for a few minutes, and Kurenai simply stared at her best friend. After some time, Kurenai smiled at Anko, put a hand on her shoulder. She didn't say anything, but her smile told Anko that she was going to help her however she could. Kurenai saw the fire in her eyes when she spoke. Anko truly wanted the boy to be happy, and she was willing to give up everything she had worked on for his happiness. The Ice Queen knew that she and Yugao saved Anko from becoming an insane sadist. She had seen the boy a few times, and every time she passed him she would always see him smile and walk through the streets like the glares and whispers didn't exist. Only Kami knows what would happen if he were to snap. Even the Kyuubi would run when a good man goes to war. Asuma's going to be surprised in the future when he sees how well I take care of children. Kurenai said quietly, getting a smile from Anko. That's if you stop crushing on him and make a move. Anko replied with a smirk. She knew how her friend could be sometimes. Kurenai sighed and kept her eyes locked onto Anko's. Her friend was truly willing to throw everything away for the boy, even though she had only just met him the day before. You know, as a friend, I can't let you go through something like this half-assed. I needed to see for myself that you were truly willing to do this. She knew her friend well, and there were a few times that she had acted without thinking beforehand. She just wanted to make sure that this wasn't one of those times. Thank you. I'd love to talk more, but I'm expected somewhere soon. I'll see you later. Anko did want to talk more to her friend, but there wasn't really much else to talk about considering that not much had happened recently other than what was already said. Even if she did continue her conversation, She believed that she shouldn't speak about the Hokage telling her to meet her at the Hokage mansion to speak about secrets involving Naruto and whatever family gave birth to him. If the Hokage wanted this to be spoken in one of the safest buildings in Konoha, then anything more than what she already said shouldn't be spoken out loud. Kurenai also wanted to talk a bit more, hoping to find out what Anko planned on doing with a child, especially one as young and impressionable as Naruto. Hopefully the boy wouldn't turn out as crazy as her now stepmother, but it was completely possible. The tone that Anko used told the Genjutsu mistress that, while whatever she was doing was important, and should probably not leave the mouths of the people discussing it, Anko would bring it up to her as she really needed to. If she didn't, then she would learn in time along with the rest of their friends. The two young women walked out of the house, and Kurenai waited for Anko to lock the place down before speaking up. "Well, I'll see you later then," she said, giving her friend an honest smile. "You'll be that boy's world, you know," she said as she walked off, only barely being able to see the honest smile that her friend gave back to her before she headed off as well. Minutes later, Anko arrived at the Hokage mansion. The building was not far off from the academy and the hospital, and looked quite similar, in fact. The main thing that stood out were the two guards who stood in front of the place. While normally the Hokage's residence would be under the protection of seals and the Hokage him or herself, Hiruzen lived in the Sarutobi clan house, and not the mansion. He needed the forbidden scrolls to be watched at all times, because he was not normally around. Upon reaching the gates, Anko was faced with two Anbu guards, who both wore armor that, while built exactly the same, was colored different to make them stand out among others. These were special Anbu who guarded the mansion, who were above the usual cut and were tasked with guarding the secrets of Konoha. As she walked up to the two of them, both Anbu stood perfectly still until she was only a few feet away from them. Once she was close enough, they both moved to the sides of the front gate and opened it for her. She didn't even have a chance to speak, as they talked first. "Hokage-sama ordered for us to let you in when you get here." The one to her right spoke. She opened her mouth, but was cut off by the one to her left. "It'll be just you and him talking. Other Anbu will put multiple seals around the room and the rest of the house so that nobody can listen in." The other one spoke. Anko nodded her head and opened her mouth once more, only to get cut off again. "When it concerns Naruto-san, Hokage-sama is willing to go to great lengths, as a way to apologize for how he's been treated in the past." She nodded once again, and didn't even bother opening her mouth, as she expected for them to talk again to answer the last question in her head. She stood there for a full minute, not uttering a single word. The Anbu did also. She believed she was safe, and opened her mouth again. "Body language and common sense, Anko-san." The Anbu answered together, both wearing unseen smiles on their masked faces. Without a word, Anko simply huffed and walked through the gates, hearing the masked nin trying to hide their laughter from her. She was sure that they thought that she was going to do something to them, and they were right. As she stepped into the building, two screams could be heard behind her, as well as some inhuman hissing. Anko hadn't been in the Hokage mansion before, or the Sarutobi clan house. She hadn't had any reason to visit the Hokage or his family in his own time. The building itself was clean and dustless. It was odd considering that the Hokage didn't use the place all that much unless he was going through one of the forbidden scrolls, which never happened. The place was untouched, with the exception of the Anbu who didn't leave any traces of their presence. The main room was what she expected. Rather large with space to fit a few people from each of the main clans at once. It could almost be considered some sort of a party or meeting room, due to the space and the seating. Sarutobi Hiruzen was sitting down at one of the end seats, sipping on what could have been either sake or some sort of really dark tea. The old man looked up upon hearing Anko walk in, and kept a soft gaze on her as she took in the area. Once she processed his presence, he smiled at the young woman and stood up, placing the cup down on the table in front of him. "Hello Anko, I see the guards are keeping themselves entertained," he asked rhetorically. knowing by the screams of pain he had heard only seconds ago was her doing. Anko smiled and chuckled nervously, all while scratching the back of her head. They're pretty good at their job. I'm not usually an easy person to see through, she said, respect for them hidden in her words as she glanced behind her. Hiruzen chuckled as well, and motioned for her to follow him while he went into another room. She wordlessly nodded and followed, watching as the old man took long and calm strides to wherever they were heading to. So, can I ask what this is all about? I mean, the paper the let. When we activate the seals, then you can begin your questions. The Hokage cut her off, not even looking back at her as he led her through a maze of hallways, ending at a room that was at the end of a hallway. Hiruzen slowly opened the door and walked through it, motioning for Anko to come through as well. He didn't need to, but it acted as a signal to tell her that they were where they were supposed to be at. As predicted, she followed and entered the door before he did, allowing him to close the door behind them both. There was a small pause between the door closing and the Hokage actually speaking. During the pause, a small pulse of chakra was emitted by one of the Anbu to tell him that the seals were in place and he could talk freely to Anko without worry of people overhearing their conversation. Breaking the silence, Hiruzen started first. Anko, what I am about to tell you is of the utmost importance. Until it is revealed to the public by myself, you are not allowed to tell anyone about anything that it's spoken about in this room, do you understand? He used a tone of authority that he didn't use often, showing the true ninja that he still was inside of an old man's body. Anko nodded to the village leader and stayed silent, allowing for him to continue speaking. In the paper that you signed, signing over Naruto-kun over to you, it stated that you will be given a seat on the council. I have no doubt in my mind that section of the paper had been running through your head, at least for a little while. At this, Anko just continued to nod. It also stated that he will get all of his clan items once he reached the rank of Chunin or reaches the age of consent, if he does not choose to be a ninja. Hiruzen highly doubted that Naruto wouldn't be a ninja, as it was in his blood to do so. Naruto does have a clan, Anko. In fact, he actually has two. The old monkey stated, causing Anko's eyes to go wide. She assumed as much, considering that the part about the clans wouldn't be in the paper if he didn't belong to one. But she couldn't believe that he had two clans. With that kind of position, he could be as important as the Hyuga clan or the Uchiha clan. Her hands clenched in anger as she looked at the ground, scowling fiercely at the hardwood floor underneath her. She couldn't believe it. He had the power of two clans and Hiruzen was making him leave off the streets. Why? She choked out, trying to keep herself from lashing out at the old man, who just stood there, unchanging. Why are you letting him live like this? She shouted at her leader, unable to hold back the rage she currently had for him. It had only been a day, but that boy had in fact managed to become her world. She didn't know how it happened, and she didn't question it. His image gave her clarity, power over the curse mark that echoed dark whisperings throughout her mind. He was her hope. Hiruzen simply looked down, a frown on his wrinkly face as he thought about what the boy had been through. I will explain, he said quietly, lifting his head a moment later to look at the enraged and hurt Anko. She gave him the look that told him that she would attempt to kill him if he didn't start explaining. Take in Naruto's appearance and attitude. Think back on every moment you saw of him. He stated to her, his face going neutral once more. Who looks like he does, and who acts like he does? Anko tried her best to calm herself down. She needed to think about this, think about all the times she had seen and heard Naruto. His sun-kissed blonde hair, his eyes that were as blue as the ocean, filled with curiosity and wonder. He shouted about becoming Hokage, and if he wasn't doing that, he was stuffing his face with ramen noodles from the Ichiraku ramen stand. He was as stubborn as a bull with the intelligence to match, but at times he could be unnaturally smart and understanding. He never stopped doing what he loved, and followed his heart. There were a number of people who had those characteristics, but one face made everything click in her head. The Yondaime, she whispered, her eyes wide once more. It all made sense. He was married to Kushina, who shared the Uzumaki name. Her clan had a spot on the council since Uzushio was decimated and brought to ruins. It didn't last long, as once Kushina died and Naruto took her name, they immediately removed her seat from the council to keep Naruto from getting his hopes up. Minato Namikaze's name was brought to clan status once he became a Hokage, as he wasn't a part of a clan beforehand. Anko didn't know either of them personally, but she had talked to them on occasion. Naruto looked just like his father, and acted like his mother. It was odd how nobody had noticed it before. Shikaku probably knew about it taking his intelligence into account, but probably didn't care when taking his laziness into account as well. Hiruzen nodded slowly and looked at Anko with a small smile. He knew that she understood now, that he had reasoning behind not bringing Naruto's heritage into light. Being the child of the man who killed countless Iwa shinobi and no doubt many more, and the woman who was the remnants of a great clan and village of sealing masters, who was also gifted with the ability to use chakra chains, there would be a high price on his head in the eyes of any shinobi. The Hokage decided that this would be a good time to bring Anko back into the physical world, and began to speak. He would be one of the most wanted shinobi in the world if that were to get out, which is why I never brought up his heritage to him before. Anko's head snapped to face Hiruzen, staying quiet so that he could continue speaking. If I were to tell everyone about his heritage, especially at this young age, the entire village would be at his beck and call, willing to do anything for him simply because he is the son of the Yondaime. There is a great chance that it would make him arrogant, and use his family name as a means to get what he wants. The civilians of the village would throw themselves at him as a way to apologize, and most likely see you unfit for raising him. They do not see what I see, what most of the shinobi on the council see. He is not a demon child, and he is not the Namikaze heir. He is Naruto Uzumaki. He is who he is because of what he has done and what he has seen, not because of whom he is related to. I believe that you will do well in helping him stay leveled when his heritage is revealed. His speech made Anko feel a little better about the situation. As she wasn't from a council clan, she would be one of the best choices for being the parent of Naruto. He and Anko would have to worry about clan problems and things now, but they wouldn't be on his head until he was ready to take over. She could also bring a somewhat new perspective into the view of the people on the council. Half of the council consisted of shinobi, so just about every perspective was already seen and considered, but her actions and decisions could be overlooked much more easily because she wasn't from a clan herself, and had no clan experience beforehand. In a way, they had political freedom in most situations. She knew the rules and laws that applied to being a Konoha nin, and she had to abide by those like everyone else, but she didn't know or understand the unspoken political rules. She never in any want, desire, or need to know them. She was being placed on the spot as the temporary matriarch of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans, and was to be given leeway in the political world because of it. Naruto was just a boy. He probably wouldn't be able to understand it even if he wanted to, and therefore was given freedom from politics as well. There was another pause, but it wasn't Hiruzen who spoke next. With the topic of Naruto and the clans, Anko decided to keep with that and asked a related question. When will the public know? She asked the Hokage, curious to know what his new plan for going about this was. I will tell the Shinobi Council during their next meeting, not at the joint meeting where the council can have their say. The ninja clans will be much more understanding than the civilian ones, and they will know along with the rest of the public in a few months. That will give you and Naruto-kun time to get used to living with each other. At this, Anko nodded her head. She didn't know that the old monkey already had a specific date for revealing his heritage to the world. For another few minutes, the room is deathly silent. The information that was given out had gravity, and neither of the ninja in the room could pull their thoughts away from it. Anko didn't know what else to say anymore, but Hiruzen had one last thing to say to his now surrogate daughter. Anko, you know how important Naruto is to me, much more so now than before because of what was recently said. I'm not telling you as your Hokage, but I'm asking you as an old grandfather. Please, show Naruto the kind of love and compassion that the village has denied it. Kami knows that he could use it. Anko smiled at the old man and glanced at the door. Like before, she didn't have anything else to say, and didn't think that she could say anything that wouldn't ruin what kind words the old man had told her. Hiruzen looked at the door as well, and was sure that nothing more needed to be said at the moment. This was a hard pill to swallow, and after everything that had happened in the last 2 days, Anko needed some rest and time to think about everything, as well as prepare for the major change in her life that was already happening. Hiruzen sent out a wave of chakra to tell the Anbu to disable the seals, and only a few seconds later he felt a wave of chakra telling him that the seals were inactive. He walked over to the door and opened it, motioning for Anko to walk through. She did as she was told and walked out of the room, weaving through the hallways next to the Hokage so that the two of them could head home and get some rest. Once they reached the main door, Hiruzen and Anko were surprised to see a medic nin standing at the door. From her appearance, she was on edge about something, and had presumably just ran from the hospital to the mansion. She panted lightly as she held onto a clipboard of some sort, that was facing towards her body so that the Hokage and the snake mistress couldn't see what was on the other side. Is everything alright? You look a little winded. The Hokage spoke up, curiosity obvious in his voice. Hokage-sama, I have news about the Uzumaki boy that was left in our care. Something happened to him. She spoke urgently, knowing that the Hokage would want to know about this as soon as possible. People knew how he took watched over the boy, and anything concerning him would be brought to the Hokage first. What about Naruto? Anko asked, now a little worried as well since it did involve the boy that she was now taking care of. Hers and the Hokage's eyes would only widen in shock once hearing what the medic nin had to say. He's missing. The Hokage and Anko were shocked to hear what the medic nin told them. They couldn't believe it. Not only was he missing, but neither of the Anbu assigned to him reported in about it. Instead, some random worker at the hospital told them about his disappearance. They could only wonder what happened to the three of them, but their imaginations didn't drift far off due to Hiruzen speaking. Anko, get to Naruto's house and wait there. I'll send an Inuzuka over to you so that Naruto-kun can be tracked. Soon after he spoke, the old man released a wave of chakra, signaling a nearby Anbu to their location. It was one of the special Anbu, as they were right next to the Hokage mansion. What do you need, Hokage-sama? The Anbu spoke, his dragon mask unmoving. Go to the Inuzuka clan and have Sum meet Anko at Naruto's house. She should already know the way. He ordered the Anbu, who bowed to his leader and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. The old man simply glanced at Anko before watching her take off to Naruto's house. She knew where it was because she had visited it once earlier in the day as a way to pass time. Whatever happened, we will find you, Naruto. Several minutes earlier. Hokage-sama is going to kill us. Not if Anko does it first. Maybe they'll take turns beating us to death. Two masked Anbu jumped from rooftop to rooftop as they tailed a figure in front of them. He was unbelievably fast for his age and size, but it was probably due to all of the exercise he got from constantly running around. Not to mention that he had slipped away from the two on more than one occasion during their little chase. The one with the cat mask shook her head as she continued to run. No, Anko would torture us slowly and painfully, and then Hokage-sama would bring out an amazing jutsu to finish us off in the most gruesome way possible for allowing this to happen. That was most likely the best case scenario, with the worst case having them both being tortured and beaten by snakes and apes while being told to take better care of Naruto, being left with an inch of their lives so that they could recover and have the whole process be repeated again and again. No, it could probably get much worse than that. They had to move their focus away from the possible ways that they could be tortured and over to the person who was just in front of them, but wasn't anymore. One moment he was on the rooftops like the Anbu were, but he suddenly disappeared from their line of sight. He probably dropped down into the streets below. While they now had the high ground, the person they were chasing could maneuver through the alleyways and crowds. He had a fair amount of knowledge of all the shortcuts and places that one could hide at, and his size allowed for him to fit just about anywhere. It was far too late for them to find Naruto and bring him back without any worries. They had been chasing the figure that was previously in front of them for several minutes now, and somebody was sure to notice that Naruto and his guards were in his room. The two Anbu dropped down to the streets below as well, and had just dropped down in time to see the head of hair that they were looking for in a sea of brown, black, and other colors. They smirked under their masks and continued to chase after him. People seeing him and the Anbu run through the streets simply assumed that he had done something wrong like usual, and didn't form the usual riot. It was odd, but appreciated by both the chased and the chasers. Not long after, they had managed to chase him into a denser part of the village, with thinner roads and several more dead ends. They knew that the chase was almost over. His movements were beginning to get a little slower, and he didn't take every twist and turn available to him as well. They had to end this and capture him so that they could get Naruto and bring him back to the hospital. Stop so we can end this. Yugao called out ahead of her. The person simply smirked and made an effort to move faster. Not a chance. You'll have to capture me. He shouted back, the smirk never leaving his face as he continued to run, jumping back up to the rooftops to give himself a little space. Kakashi and Yugao continued to tail him, both sighing inwardly as they should have known that he wouldn't go back without a struggle. Kakashi threw several kunai in front of him. He wasn't trying to hit the person he was chasing. He was hoping that they would become an obstacle to him, and make him either slow down or trip. As he planned, the person in front of them tripped over one of the kunai that had lightly dug itself into the roof, and caused him to fall over and back down onto the ground. He was good, but not good enough. The person grunted as they hit the ground, glaring at the two figures who appeared before him. That's not fair. You can't use kunai. Yugao shook her head at him, taking an unnoticed glance at Kakashi. We can use any techniques at our disposal. You should be lucky I didn't decide to use my sword. That's a part of the rules. Yugao said, getting a nod from Kakashi. Yeah, that's how it goes, and you could have been off much worse. He said to the person on the ground, who still looked up at them with anger. You guys didn't say anything about rules. He shouted at them as he got up, brushing himself off. Well, this is ninja tag. Even you should know how it goes, future Hokage-sama. Yugao said in an uncharacteristically kind and somewhat mocking voice. Kakashi nodded once more and looked around. It might have been too enclosed to see the sun, but the lighting of the area said what needed to be said. And the sun hasn't gone down before you were captured, so we can't talk to the real Hokage-sama about letting you out of the hospital. He said, looking back down at the person in front of him. He was silent. He didn't want to accept his fate. He knew that he was beaten up pretty badly this time, and he knew that the Hokage would keep him up in the room for a month until he decided that he was healthy enough to move around again. He looked up in mild surprise when he felt a hand on his shoulder, which came from Yugao. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Naruto. Hokage-sama and Anko are probably worried sick. We didn't leave them a note or anything saying that we'd be with you. Let's get going. She took her hand off of his shoulder and began to walk back to the hospital, and was followed by Kakashi and eventually Naruto himself. A little more than 2 hours ago, Naruto had woken up. He didn't know all the details about what happened, but he knew that he was beaten up and someone came to save him. Kakashi and Yugao filled him in on everything else, and deeply apologized to him for what they had done, or what they hadn't done. He accepted their apologies and asked them if he could leave the hospital, as he was feeling much better thanks to the healing of the Kyuubi, added with his own Uzumaki blood. They had told him that they didn't have any say when it came to releasing him from the hospital, and only the Hokage and the doctors and nurses assigned to him could do anything about that. After several minutes of complaining about it, a deal was made between the three. If Naruto could last until after the sun sets in a game of ninja tag, then Kakashi and Yugao would talk to the Hokage about possibly letting Naruto out of the hospital. If not, then Naruto would owe each of them a favor to be done sometime in the future. Looking back, neither of them knew why they agreed to it. They could get in serious trouble for giving the Hokage a scare involving Naruto, not to mention what Anko would probably do if he had gotten injured again. Luckily, he wasn't, and the bruise that he had gotten from the fall disappeared in only a few minutes. Hopefully the Hokage and Anko would have mercy on their souls. Present time. The dragon-masked guard of the Hokage appeared at the Inuzuka clan ground and knocked on the door to the main home. It did not take long for someone to open the door, and young woman there was quite surprised at seeing an Anbu at her home. The girl looked at the Anbu curiously and took a step back, allowing for him to come in. "What do you need, Anbu-san?" she asked politely, something uncommon for an Inuzuka to do. The Anbu simply stood where he was and looked at the girl before him. She had the marks of an Inuzuka, but she didn't look as feral as the others. She had a Konohagakure headband wrapped around her waist as a belt, telling him that she was at least a genin. Hokage-sama needs Sume Inuzuka to help in tracking down someone. "It's an order by the Hokage," he said monotonously, as per the usual with him. The Inuzuka girl looked up at the Anbu and shook her head. "Ka-san is out on a mission right now. I can help, though. The triplets are really good at tracking." She looked into her home and whistled, causing 3 pups to scramble to their master. She then looked back at the Anbu and gave him a nod of assurance. "Lead the way." Ryu stayed quiet for a moment, internally deciding on whether or not to take Sume's daughter to the Uzumaki house in place of Sume. She should have to do. The Anbu nodded back and began to run at a pace that the Inuzuka girl was capable of. It was still fairly fast, but it wasn't the ANBU's top speed. The 3 dogs all climbed onto the girl in various spots and held on as she began to run as well. It was a good pace for her, and she was glad that the Anbu was going that slow for her. In little time, they arrived at the Uzumaki house. The Inuzuka girl had never been near this specific house before, as its old and beaten up appearance would have told her if she had been there before. When she got there, she noticed that there was a woman waiting in front of the door. She appeared impatient, almost frantic, and familiar as well. It didn't take long for her to recognize the older woman that was not in front of him. "Anko-san," she said with surprise. Anko couldn't have mistaken the girl for anyone else, and was truly assured when she heard her voice. Wow, what a surprise. There was no sarcasm in her words, as she was actually feeling surprised inside. "Where's Sume?" she asked, her franticness being heard in her voice. "She's out on a mission. I'm the next best thing." She wanted to assure these people that she was ready to do whatever the Hokage needed her mother to do. Anko sighed inwardly. She had to get to know more people than the 3 people she was always around. She was already on good terms with Sume, so becoming friends with her shouldn't be too hard. "Alright, let's go. I need your pups to find Uzumaki Naruto, and as fast as possible. There's a whole bunch of stuff in his place that we can use for his scent," Anko told the Inuzuka girl as she practically kicked down the door. It was already beaten up, and he wasn't going to be living there any longer, so it wasn't really a problem for her. Hana tilted her head in confusion and slight worry. "I don't think it's good to just break into his house, even if it is a means to find him." Anko shrugged her shoulder and began to walk around, looking at things and wondering what would be the best thing to get his scent from. "It doesn't matter. I'm his parent now, and he's moving out of this dump as soon as possible." Hana just sighed and kept the triplets from going wild in a completely unmarked place. It had so many smells, but 2 of them stood out to her. "Ramen and blood. Aha!" Anko shouted, holding one of the several identical jumpsuits that Naruto had in his wardrobe. She handed it over to Hana, who took it and offered it to the Heimaru triplets, who sniffed the outfit several times before jumping off of Hana and yipping as they ran out of the house. "They already have his scent, let's go," Hana commanded, surprising Anko slightly. The two of them, along with the dragon Anbu, followed the pups all through the village to find a certain blonde-haired hero. The three ninja chased after the three pups as they followed a strong scent. The individual scents that mixed together to smell like Naruto were already strong on their own, but even more so when mixed together. They ran past the ramen stand, through several streets and alley